Hey, welcome to another episode of Not Scrum Dumb podcast, where we give you tips on how to be a smarter Scrum practitioner. So, today we are going to talk about the 7 reasons that there are so many failed Scrum adoptions. First one on our list is just a flat out lack of understanding. Most Scrum teams that I've seen that fail to adopt Scrum aren't actually using Scrum. What about you, Scott?
Same. I mean, yeah, they just have superficial knowledge and incomplete understanding of the Scrum principles and the values. They maybe start out their implementation with mechanical Scrums, which we've talked about in a previous video, and that's where you have the three accountabilities in place, the three artifacts, and the 5 events. What else can you think of?
I mean, I've seen Scrum teams that don't even have a sprint review. Some of them eventually abandon sprint retrospective. They're still calling it daily stand up instead of daily scrum. There's a lot of misunderstanding. And then some people will say, well, Scrum says you have to do it this way. And it's like this like manipulative, let me get you to do what I want you to do. And then you look at the Scrum guide and it doesn't even say what that person said. So that lack of understanding, it really gets people to a place where they don't even like Scrum. And when I see how they're practicing Scrum or fake Scrum, I don't even like it. So I completely understand where they're coming from. All right. So the second one is resistance to change. So in some organizations, they're still working on that traditional mindset, and so is management. So they're not giving the team autonomy, they're not supporting the team.
Yeah, that command and control environment. I mean, I know. Well, I'm gonna put them on empathetic and sympathetic hat for a moment and say, as you read the Scrum Guide, it doesn't say anything about managers. It doesn't say anything about but three roles on a Scrum team, and I guess everybody else feel like they're lonely. They don't know how they should help a Scrum team, and I think that's where the coaching stance from us as Scrum and Agile practitioners need to help bridge that gap. That that resistance to change, I think, really comes from a lack of the first bullet point of lack of an understanding of, how do I fit into the Scrum and Agile world, and not really been coached the proper way to know how you can fit and help. I think that will help the change. But it looks like from just a natural eye, it's just resistant to change. And I'm not sure if it's truly the root cause could be, is it more so of a lack of understanding of what they should be doing and how they could support? Some of the things I'm thinking about.
That's a really good point, and that actually takes us to our next thing. It could be insufficient education and training. Now, I do want to start with, as a Scrum Master, if you're a Scrum Master, it is on you to be educating the organization and the Scrum team members and management and coaching the product owner. And I know that was part of what you just mentioned in the resistance to change, but do you want to add some more details to this one?
Yeah, insufficient education and training. Yeah, I definitely want to add more to that. I like what you just said. Scrum Master is the one, that's actually in the third service area that we have in the Scrum Guide. Our responsibility is to the Scrum team, the product owner, and the organization. Sadly, most Scrum Masters that I teach, coach, and talk to initially, they have never been out of their local Scrum team in terms of making change to ever get on the organizational impediments, like HR, sales, things of that nature. Insufficient education and training. Now, here's another thing I want to call out too, and y'all can run this test on your team. Ask your product owner, do they have a product owner certification? They more than likely to tell you no. Ask your product owner, do they have a Scrum Master certification? They're likely to tell you yes. So I've met a lot of product owners in my career that they have my certification, but they haven't spent the time in their own certification to up their skills to be a better product owner in their position. Again, not all, just in my experiences, and that's a small sample size. So I'm not talking about the world, just Scott's experiences. But do a test,
Yeah.
run that test yourself. Ask your product owner, hey, you got a product owner certification? No, I got my Scrum Master certification. Go ahead, Adriana.
That's a really good point. And one of the things that I did was I read the professional product owner book with a product owner to help this person as they were starting off in their journey. So it doesn't necessarily always have to be a formal training and formal certification. There are so many cheap products out there where you can get a book. And the other thing is, I was really fortunate to have someone come into our organization, they did only coach the scrum team, but that made a significant difference, and that was at the start. So when we wanted to transition into scrum, that was the first thing we did, and then we were able to start scrumming. And I think that kind of goes to some organizations have a lack of leadership support. Fortunately, in that example I just gave, we had leadership support to actually go learn Scrum. It took some time for them to adapt to Scrum and that releasing that command and control style. But this I've seen in a lot of organizations where they're stepping on the toes of the Scrum team. They don't want to give them any autonomy. They don't want to help them develop and become better. It becomes a big challenge. And anytime they're messing with your product goal, they're messing with your morale, they are also messing with your purpose for even being there. What do you think, Scott?
No, I like everything you said. I mean, yeah, lack of leadership support. Yeah, without that leadership buy-in and commitment, and creating a supportive culture that embraces Scrum becomes very, very difficult, leading to resistance and obstacles throughout the adoption process. Yeah, it's highly important to have that Scrum champion outside of the Scrum team, that C-suite level VP. And in my career, I may have had, dozens of scrum teams I've had in my career. I probably can only think of two people within inside the organization, let's say like on a, like next to the CEO level that really champion that. And those person really champion Scrum and Agile. And for those people that, that led it on that level, it was a difference in night and day at the Scrum team level of how we operated and the flexibility we had versus those companies I've been in that didn't have that level of upper level support, higher level support.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think also leadership could also be your direct manager because they have a dramatic impact immediately. And if they're not supporting the Scrum team by maybe helping remove impediments or allowing them to self manage instead of stepping in and solving all their problems, your Scrum team isn't going to get to a place of being self managing. All right. So the next one, cherry picking and incomplete implementation. Now, I kind of touched on that in lack of understanding. I think that may be the root of this one, but the cherry picking is definitely problematic. We'll say for this one, every event does have its own purpose. And when you leave out events, you are leaving out opportunities to inspect and adapt. If you're leaving out artifacts, then you're removing transparency. What is the point of Scrum if you're not going to be transparent, inspect, and adapt? When we talk about cherry picking these like little elements that you're taking out, you're messing up the whole thing. It is a bit of a domino effect, and you can go look up the Scrum framework and how each of these have its purpose and connect to each other. And then we have misalignment with organizational culture. You want to take this one, Scott?
Yeah. When the Scrum values clash with the organizational existing culture and values, the adoption process may encounter significant challenges and struggle to gain traction. I'm thinking about, that company that all they knew is waterfall methodology, and now they're doing an agile methodology transformation, a top-down transformation. And it's very, very difficult with that if you're not changing the language, if you're not getting the proper training, as we talked about in a previous bullet point, and having the leadership support. Is that aligned with the organizational culture? Because Scrum, if you're going in that environment, is a total culture shift from what that is, because you're coming from telling people what to do, how to do, when to do. Where Scrum, self-managing is the opposite of that. No, we are empowered to figure out what to do, how to do, when to do on our own. We're going to get together and collaborate on what that is. And as Andriana identified, we call that empiricism. We don't know. It's okay for us to embody the values and raise our hand and say, look, I don't know. But hey, let's put our heads together and come up with an idea and see. Now, in another world, what? What? You might get looked at like you crazy. I'll try.
Yeah, that's a great example. Nothing to add there, so might as well go to the last one. Inadequate adaptation to context. Do you want to start with us off with this one, Scott?
Yeah, failing to adopt Scrum practices and processes to fit the specific needs and context of the organization leads to suboptimal outcomes, as we've been identified, limited effectiveness in realizing the benefits of Scrum. Going back to some of the terms we've talked about again already, mechanical Scrum, We've said that in probably 3 different ways already. You know, cherry picking Scrum, just inadequate adaptation to the context. And not only that, now what this bullet point is talking about is really more so, okay, now assuming that you're doing Scrum right, remember Scrum is a framework. You may need some other things up underneath the Agile methodology umbrella, depending upon your context. Some of those could be Kanban, as we mentioned on the job description in the previous video. Some of that could be extreme programming or something else that's underneath that Agile methodology umbrella that if you feel that your team could benefit from it, first, you got to know it from a Scrum Master standpoint so that you can introduce it to your team and run an experiment with it. That's where the empiricism come into play. Androna, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I talked to someone who wasn't interested in flow metrics because it was a Kanban thing. I'm like, not like really, like there's nothing that says you can't use it in Scrum. If it's going to help your team, if it's going to get you to done, try it out. And I think the other part to this is be willing to continuously improve. Always be willing to try new things, even if that requires a little bit of failure. Take the sprint retrospective because you're not cherry picking anymore after this video and look at opportunities to grow, get better, and keep learning from each other. All right. If you stay to the end of this video, that means you have an attention span greater than a goldfish. We appreciate you. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to get connected with us, check out the links in the description. And you can also take a class with us and get some free information. That's all in the description.